So, welcome to Viva España, more than Rioja. Not to say that we don't like Rioja, we do. It's wonderful wine, but I think one of the challenges for Spain has traditionally been that it's got maybe stuck in a rut a little bit on occasion. We've sort of found ourselves talking about the same old wines time and time again. And, you know, when people think of Spanish wine, they immediately think of Rioja. And there's so much more to Spain now. In fact, I'm going to pull up for you now. I've been practicing screen sharing. So let me pull up the right one. Hopefully I've got nothing. Here we go. Right, so, okay. Can everyone see that? Oh, hang on, let's make it big. So here is a map of Spain, Spanish wine regions, and this evening we're actually doing a bit of a triangle. We're starting up here, right over in the northwest corner in Galicia, in Viva España, here, and then we'll be zooming all the way across to northeast Spain to Catalonia and to the Terra Alta region just here, and then we'll be heading right down here to the southernmost tip to Jerez in Andalusia. So I think we're covering quite an interesting spectrum of Spanish wines. Of course, we can't cover all of Spain in 3 wines. I mean, we couldn't do it in 3 days, but the wines that we've chosen for this evening are really what I hope embodies the quality, the value, and the diversity that you find in Spain. You know, it really embracing both the traditional but also the kind of innovative modern things that are going on in Spanish winemaking. So we're going to start with our Fento La Libre y la Tortuga. Has everyone got that in their glass? Rosalie, apart from you, sorry. Parcel force, COVID-19. Has everyone got a glass? Can they just raise it so I can see, or a bottle? Yay. Yay, excellent, good. Well, first of all, cheers. Yeah, saludo. So, oh, that's really tasty, isn't it? First things first, that is a perfect, refreshing glass of white after a long day. So we're starting, as I said, in Galicia in the northwest. This is an area known very much as green Spain, because it's a little bit damper, it's cooler, it's a coastal region. I'm going to do my second screen share of the evening. It worked well the first time. I'm just going to pull up the actual region of Galicia for you. Hang on one second. Let's make sure I get the right one. Perfect. Okay, and make it a bit bigger. So hopefully you can all see that. So here we are in Rioja, right here on the Atlantic coast. And as I was saying, this is the area which is a little bit cooler and fresher than a lot of other parts of Spain. And this is, you know, largely influenced by the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, the inlets and fjords which make up the region, as you can see, it's kind of in and out the coastline here, are known as Rioja, in fact. So Rioja literally means the lower Rioja, in fact. The vineyards themselves are sort of mostly granite and schist, and there's been winemaking here really since the Roman times. And then you know, the Romans brought viticulture across from what is now Italy, of course. I think it's often important to remind the French that you know, until the Romans came along, they were not the masters of wine at all. And obviously, after they conquered Spain as well, they brought the viticulture here. And probably the bigger advances came with the Cistercians in the 12th century. So that's the other thing. Romans bring wine to people, and monks bring wine to people wherever they travel, you know, whether it's Burgundy, whether it is Italy, northern Italy, whether it is Spain, whether in fact it is Lebanon too, they bring wine. So you had grapes growing here in the 12th century as well. And the key grape here, I'm gonna come out of this map now. The key grape in this region is Albarino, which is what you're drinking. So the original DO, or a denomination, in the region was called DO Albarino. But then when in 1988, as part of the EU regulations, you couldn't have a grape as a DO, it had to be a region. So the DO was changed to Viva España. But 99% of the production in this region is white wine, and of that 96% is Albarino. So it's really the dominant grape. So when we talk about this region, we're really thinking about Albarino. So the producer, Fento, was founded in 2012, and the vines are right in the south of Rioja, just near a place called Pontevedra. If you recall back to the map, it was the little conurbation to the south of the vineyard regions. And it's got these very kind of weathered granitic soils, and the grapes are trained traditionally in the old kind of pergola way. So you know, when you sort of train them up high and across, or like you have like a ceiling of grapes, and that was traditionally to allow the surface crops to grow underneath. And that is the majority of the way the grapes are still are trained there. And with Fento, they're all done like that. Vineyards are about 100+ meters up. And this is this mountainous region right by the Minho River, in fact. Have a little sniff. Everyone get stuck in. You've got a whole bottle between ones and twos here, so don't be shy. I noticed no spittoons either, which is always good news. What's interesting for me when I smell this Albarino is it's traditionally very steely. It's very fresh. It's very crunchy. Lots of kind of mineral drive. But this actually has a really nice ripeness and roundness to the wine as well. And this is largely, I think, because the vineyards here are in the Contado subregion. And this is the most inland, the driest and the hottest region of Rioja. And therefore, I think you get this extra bit of ripeness and roundness and richness, which just fleshes out the wine really rather attractively. I'm getting a kind of combination of that lime, citrus, but some riper, sort of spicier tropical notes, some papaya, and then a twist of chalk as well, some nice crunchy minerality. I've got my I've got some snacks here. I've got some Spanish olives. I've got some freshly shucked almonds that I did earlier, and for a bit later on, I've also got some chorizo. Oh, I just lost a bit, but anyway, I hope everyone else has some bits and pieces to nibble on. So having a little nose. And a taste, I think the palate leads nicely on from the nose. Great acidity down the jawline, fresh and crunchy, zippy, really very tasty, very Moorish, and yeah, definitely something that you want several more glasses of. Now, over to you guys. Does anyone have any comments or questions? There's nothing on chat so far, but I know you're all a chatty bunch. So Anyone want to wave at me? I think you can actually unmute yourselves. I'm being particularly generous today. So if anyone wants to say anything, please do comment.
Tom, can I ask a question?
Yes, Anna, of course.
Hi. Can you remind us how the Spanish classify their wines? You know, like the Premier Cru, Grand Cru equivalent, and where does this one sit?
Yeah, that's a good question, and luckily it's a relatively easy one to answer because they don't. By and large, they don't. So that's not 100% true, but Spain, like France and like Italy, has a classification system which is regional. And then within that, there are certain tiers. So this, for example, is a DO. So this would be the equivalent of an AOC in France or a DOC in Italy. There are a handful of regions, and again, it's all regional rather than internal, like Burgundy or Bordeaux. There are a couple of examples, Rioja and Priorat, for example, which are actually the equivalent of DOCG in Spain. So a higher tier of appreciable quality, at least from a regional basis. Now, of course, within that, you do have, for example, in Rioja, you have a Crianza level, and a Reserva level, and a Gran Reserva level. But that's very specific to Rioja. You don't really see that, generally speaking, in the majority of the rest of Spain's regions. So it's quite, it's not as stratified as we find in specific regions like Burgundy or Bordeaux. Oh, Rebecca, you're waving. Good. Oh, hang on. Let me unmute you. You're being very civilized, not doing yourself. Please, yeah.
I wasn't sure how to. I wonder if you could say what foods it might go best with. What sort of food would be best for eating with this?
Yeah, a great question. I mean, I'm certainly enjoying it with my my olives here. It's a classic aperitif white, you know, fresh and light. The alcohol is sort of 12.5%, so it's nice and light. So it's not a wine that you need to find big flavors for. I often think that one is well advised to try pairing wines with the sort of regional cuisine that you'd actually find where they're made. So, you know, here we're pretty much on the coast. You know, you can imagine this working really beautifully nicely with freshly caught, simply prepared Atlantic seafood, shellfish. Nothing too rich, I don't think. And then beyond that, you know, it would be your lighter white meat dishes, chicken perhaps, and general sort of light tapas dishes. I think that would be a nice steer for that sort of a wine. Sneh, is that you waving or adjusting the? You are waving. Good, perfect, excellent.
Thank you. Sorry, I just struggled to see your map a little bit earlier.
Oh yeah, shall I pull that back up?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where the region is, and is this a cold region? Is it getting a lot of sun? Is it atypical for what you see in Spain? Because I don't know Spanish whites, but this tastes a little bit different to most whites that I've had before. It just feels much more fresh and crisp than the whites I expect from Europe.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. I'm just pulling up the. Hang on, here it is. So here is the. Can you see that, Sneh? You got it?
Yeah. Oh, I see. I can pinch out for a bigger view.
We're right up here in the northwest tip here in Galicia, and Rías Baixas is that the top kind of green strand here that you see coming in diagonally. So actually, this very much explains the style of the wines. It really is cooler nights, much cooler nights. I think it's got 3 times the average national rainfall in the area. So you will get much leaner, crisper fresher styles of wines from this region, in fact. And yeah, you see the reds as well. They're very rare from this region, but again, they're much, you don't associate them with your typical big, rich, bold Spanish wine. So any more comments on the, yes, Yvonne, Yvonne, are you trying to come in? Hang on, wait a minute. There we go.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Yvonne.
Hello there. I was just going to ask then, this one's better drunk young.
Yes, so there's a little bit of feedback. I don't know if there's another, if there's someone.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that the virtues and benefits of youth in this case are fairly clear to witness. It's fresh and light and zippy. That having been said, you know, this is a style which is deliberately completely unoaked. It's reasonably old vines. Well, 14 to 19 years. That's you know, that's not old, but they're maturing vines. So you get quite complex fruit. But this is definitely a wine where you want to be drinking, you know, vintages which are 1 to 2 to 3 years old. There is within Viva España, there are different levels of Albarino, or different styles, and you can get ones which are oak aged, which do longer ferments. You can get much richer, bigger styles, but certainly this particular one, I think it's all about drinking it young and fresh and zippy and you know, enjoying the primary fruit. Great.
Just another question. On the what's the region like in terms of you know, the size of the producers? Have we got like lots of little producers in the region, or is it dominated by, you know, a bunch of larger guys?
Good question. Now, well, there's a few cooperatives. There's a few cooperatives in the region. There's a handful of bigger names, and there's a lot of artisans. This particular project actually was actually started by, because they're so close to Portugal. In fact, there's a big influence from a great winemaker whose name escapes me. It'll come back to me. Who's actually kind of consulting here on the wine. So there is some international interest as well in the region. But generally speaking, you've got a mix, mainly of small to medium sized artisans, a couple of bigger players, and then a number of growers who produce either for the bigger names or for smaller cooperatives. There's a bit of a mix. Any more, or shall we move on to the red? Oh, yes. Okay, fine. Hang on. If by the way, if I didn't see you raising your hand, please just pop something in the chat box. And again, if you don't want to actually ask a question live, or you just have a comment, please do use the chat away there. That's always useful for me. It means I never run out of stuff to say, basically. So, okay. Whilst we're finishing our white glasses and you're pouring your reds, I'm just going to invite my wife to come and top up her own glass, in fact. Sweetie, do you want a glass of white? Sweetie, do you want a glass of white? Come and get it if you do. No? Right. Okay. I have to say, one thing I don't get used to with these Zoom tastings is the general sort of silence when you've got so many people in front of you. I normally find it interesting, kind of shouting over people, and now everyone's very quiet. So yeah, I'll have to start whispering. Onto the red. Do we all have the red in our hands? Rosalie, Andy, I know you don't. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Have a sherry on me. So now we're we're staying in the north, but we're heading all the way across from Galicia, right the way across to Catalonia. And in fact, we're sort of slightly in the south of Catalonia near Tarragona. And I'm going to pull up this map for you. Charlie did these maps for me, by the way. So thank you, Charlie. My geography is hopeless at the best of times, and I can just about navigate around the world by wine region. But it is tricky. Now let's have a look. Here we go. Bingo. Okay, so we're over here in Catalonia. You can see Barcelona nicely there in the middle of the coast there. And then if you're coming south and west down to near Tarragona, the lightest green area beyond is the Terra Alta region. More famously, to its sides, you've actually got Montsant and Priorat. Here is the dark green, is the sort of the green stain within the larger region of Montsant, in fact. So let's just come out of that. There we are. So this is really quite an interesting example of the new Spain, I think. Firstly, the region itself is, I mean, it's been making wine again since the Romans, but, and there is evidence that the Knights Templar, in fact, planted vines and made wine here. But given that it's actually not as close to the coast or any major conurbations as other regions, a lot of the vineyards were given over to the production of olive oil, in fact, really. So wine has been knocking about for a while, but it's only been, I'd say, in more recent years that it's come to people's attention. And that's probably due to its more famous neighbors, which I mentioned earlier, Montsant and particularly Priorat. So the big grape down here tends to be a Garnacha, or Grenache as we know it in France, with a percentage of Tempranillo and Cariña or Cariñena, as it's known in Spain. Here, the wine we have, you've actually got the note, so you know what it is. But it's actually a blend here of Syrah and Tempranillo and Cariña. So Syrah, I think, works really quite nicely in this much hotter, more arid climate. This is Spain as you tend to think of it when you see the vineyards. This is not the green Spain of Galicia. This is very hot, arid Spain, where you're getting richly alcoholic wines, lots of ripeness, powerful black spicy fruit. The soils here are largely chalk and clay. The clay is important because it helps retain some of the water, which of course in a very dry region is very important because it means that the grapes don't suffer from dehydration too much in the hotter months. And we're at about 400 meters altitude, so we're much higher. We're at least double, if not more. We're actually higher than double, probably triple, getting on for triple the altitude of the vines in Galicia in the north. The estate or the vineyard, the winery, Cella Alemara, is quite a fun story, in fact. I think, Nathan, I'm right in thinking that Andy was a contact of yours, a friend of yours, or I'm going to unmute you. Hang on.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I just did it. Yeah, it's. Am I muted or unmuted?
There we are. Unmuted.
You can hear me. Yeah. It's a funny story. A lot of you will know I actually mainly work in space technology and optics and satellites and stuff. And actually, here's a guy who tried to sell me a piece of military optics, and we ended up not doing that deal. And he came to me a few years later. I met up with him in Quo Vadis in Soho, and said, my family's just bought these vineyards. And I went, oh my God, I always hate it when that happens. I actually got him to send us some samples. And I think Dom and Steph were there. We actually had one of our Premier Crew Pub evenings, brought the bottles one cold January evening, and everybody loved them. And we've had the Lumi Negre, the Lumi Rosat, and the Lumi Blanc, and the other wines from that range on our sommelier selection ever since.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, they're great wines, and again, they really epitomise for me the new Spain, which is incredible value for money, really good quality, good fruits, but wines that are being made in a slightly more modern style now. So Andy and his wife Ali, the MacLeods, and it's actually with their son Rob and his partner Elena. It was Rob and Elena who found the vineyards, and Rob's parents were already involved in a vineyard project in England. And I think if you've tried making wines in the UK and you get the opportunity to go somewhere much, much warmer and frankly a lot cheaper, then you can see why they leapt at the chance to throw themselves into this project as well. Now, the name of the region Terra Alta literally means the high land, and given I've said that the vineyards are up to 400 meters, you can understand that comparatively for Spain, this is a pretty high altitude region. Then I love the fact that we've got the MacLeod family who are making the wines here. Stop me if you can see where I'm going with this. But given, of course, that it was Sean Connery who played Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez in The Highlander, it's the MacLeod, it's MacLeod, it's Highlander. I'm pretty sure that there's a big connection here. You know, Spain, Highlander, MacLeod. Okay, it's terrible. I should have just sacked that joke off, but anyway, it's out there now, so apologies. The bottle, if everyone can just hold up the bottle, I will as well. Does anyone want to have a guess what the insignia is on the front? What that actually is? That sort of well, I can't see it on mine, but yeah. Anyone want to have a guess? Everyone's waving the bottles around. Unmute yourself and say if you think you know. No guesses?
Curtain pole. Is it a virus?
Is it a yes, or DNA, or no? I like that. It would be very appropriate if it was, but thankfully it isn't. No. Any guesses apart from virus?
It's a filament.
It's a filament. I think we're getting closer. We're getting a bit
Curtain
closer.
pole.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that? Who was that?
Curtain pole.
Curtain pole. It totally looks like the end of a curtain. Yeah. Not in the study here, but in our bedroom, we definitely have the same thing.
Is it a torch?
Ah, now we're on the money. Now we're on the money. Or we're super close. It's actually the iron basket that holds a signal fire. The torch is spot on. And in fact, it's because Alemara means beacon. So this is a reference to the kind of the beacons that were lit up and down the coast, well, rather up in the mountains along the coast, you know, to warn of impending invasion or just to light the way, that sort of thing. So that's what it is. It's the kind of iron brazier that would keep the fire, that would light the beacon. And in fact, the name Lumi means match. So we've got a whole sort of theme going on here. The region is in fact very well known for its ironwork too. So it's quite a nice story there. They're really pulling in all the kind of traditional elements and making a rather fun wine at the same time. So has everyone had a bit of a sniff and a bit of a taste? Any comments on the wine? There's so many hands in the air drinking glasses. I'd rather you just unmuted yourselves. You're all trustworthy, good people. So you know. Well, one of the things I think that's quite interesting is the the Syrah character really shines through here. Often the wines from this region, from Catalonia, as I said, very Garnacha dominant, which tend to be sweeter, more red cherry fruit, or Cariñena, which this has, which is very kind of herbal, herbaceous, almost like a tobacic licorice quality. Whereas here, I really think you're getting that classic kind of Syrah pepperiness and blackcurrant fruit, but also you know, not it's got quite a nice linearity to it. It's not big and bumptious fruit. There's nice length and nice drive and nice minerality here. They age this, or rather they ferment this in stainless steel, but then it does a passage of about 6 months in quite large 3-year oak barrels, or sorry, third use oak barrels, which just, I think, rounds it out a bit, gives it a bit more of an oxidative influence, and certainly lets it evolve really rather pleasantly. Any comments or thoughts?
What would you say about aging potential on this one? Because it feels quite smooth.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. This I think. I mean, I would have no problem suggesting a fairly open-ended drinking window. It's already showing a lot of charm and character right now. At the same time, I think watching it evolve over 4 to 5 years, where the acidity will soften a little bit, the fruit character will become a bit more pruneau. You'll find more secondary and even tertiary characters, more spice, more herbs, maybe more florality coming out. So the problem, if I'm honest, with this wine is that at £12.90 a bottle, I'd have to have quite a lot of it to keep it aside, because I'd just keep drinking it. Anything that was in my house wouldn't last, you know. So I think that's the problem. Is it's always worth, when you find a wine you like, or even if you find a wine you don't like, it's always worth keeping a bottle back to see how it evolves, because you can certainly discover if you should have drunk it earlier, but also it's quite impressive how even more modest wines like this can develop more complexity and more balance, more cohesion, given a bit more time. David, yes, sorry, what were you going to say? Over to you. Oh,
were you
nearly.
asking me? I'm getting very confused here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which David are there? There's millions.
Oh, there's a couple. David Tabuzel. There we go. Yeah.
All right. No, I was only going to talk about the aging as well, and actually, it's. I know the region really well because obviously I lived in Spain for 15 years, and this wine in 5 years' time is going to be amazing. The body will go, and I think it's a delicious find. I'd love to buy a case from you, please.
That's a brilliant comment. The comment of the night, and well done. Excellent. No, thank you, David. That's great.
I'll go back in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. Dawn, are you pointing at the screen, or are you wanting to comment? I can unmute you. I'm going to do it. I'm sure you've got something clever to say.
I'm just pointing, really. I don't have anything. I do like the wine very much, so.
So a case for you as well, then. Excellent. Oh, good.
Yes, at least one. I was hoping for a bigger delivery.
Perfect. Okay, marvelous. So we've got as I said, we've got a mixture of grapes, indigenous and the sort of the Syrah which has come in. One of the other points to mention, I suppose, is that although we've got high altitude and a lot of heat, like a number of regions in Spain, and I should have mentioned it with the Albarino beforehand, one of the key influences in Spanish vineyards is the pull between the different winds, in fact. So here we have, well, the moderation that comes from the Rieto, which is kind of coming in from the interior. And then we've got the Garbi. These are all kind of local names. This would be the Mistral, basically, coming up from the Mediterranean. So you've got the cooler winds, which will effectively moderate the temperature and ensure that at night, in particular, you don't bake out the aromatics and the freshness in the grape. But also the warmer winds are very good for preventing sort of mildew or rot or fungal diseases that could be a real pain. So you find this throughout Spain, even in Rioja, funnily enough, which we could hardly call a coastal region. Vintages are often described as either a Mediterranean vintage when it's a hot year, or rather a very ripe style, or an Atlantic vintage when it's a slightly cooler, fresher style of wine, in fact. So it's quite interesting, the effect of the winds, often coastal, on the wine styles that you find in Spain. Ah. So any more comments or questions on the Cella Alemara, or shall we move on to some sherry?
Tom? Sorry, Sneh here again.
Sneh, yes.
Don't want to monopolize the questions. There's a few on the chat as well. But everyone knows Syrah, everyone knows Tempranillo, but the Carignan is pretty unknown grape. Is it only Spanish? Where else do you find it? What does it give to what's the characteristics?
Very good question. Thank you, Sneh. Sorry, I've just realized that for some reason that the chat hasn't been showing me all your questions. Apologies for that. I've now just seen that there's been plenty and loads. So we'll get to those in a bit. Possibly not your question, Don, although maybe later on the evening is still definitely young. That was Don, not Dom, by the way. So Sneh, to your point about the grape Carignan. So yes, it's known as Carignana in Spain, throughout Spain. We see it also quite commonly in the south of France, in the Midi, in and around Provence, in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the southern Rhône, where it is Carignan. It's also found where I think it does particularly well in Sardinia as well, where it's Carignano. So it's all, you know, variants on a theme. I remember reading or being told a wonderful description of Carignan is that it's the grape which smells like going into an old Catholic church. It's got this kind of sense of incense, old polished leather, old wood. It's a grape which, you know, on its own can be a little bit lacking in primary fruit, but it really adds this interesting earthy, spicy complexity to a wine, which is very attractive. So yeah, it's mainly found in Europe. Spain, southern France, and Sardinia, where it does very well as well.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. I worked hard at it. So there we go. Good. I'm now seeing all your comments. These are brilliant. I don't know why it wasn't coming up on my feed earlier. How annoying. So before we move on to the sherry, I'm just going to go back. I'm going to back up a bit and see if there's anything there I can answer usefully. Albarino, so right all the way back to Sue's question about Albarino. Is it only found in Spain? No, it is found across the border in Portugal. I mentioned that this region of Rioja is, you know, it basically follows the Minho River, and you are pretty close to Portugal, of course, and you find it does very well as Alvarinho. Alvarinho is excellent in Portugal as well. In terms of where else you find it, it's possibly up for grabs. So certainly some conjecture. Until relatively recently, there was a lot of suggestion that the grape was in fact brought over by a sort of Germanic exodus. So it's actually, you know, possibly a hybrid or somehow related to Riesling or to Silvaner or to some of the more Teutonic varieties. These days, however, the Spanish are very keen to say, no, it's an indigenous variety. So then just moving down a bit. Oh, it's Charlie, you answered that one. Oh, very good. Okay. Here we go. Let's have a look. Oh, good. There can be only one. Good. I'm glad to see some people appreciated my really pathetic Highlander joke. I should have worked on that one more. Good to see the bidding on the cases is going very well. And Rebecca, thank you for asking about food pairings for the red. So as I think I showed you earlier, I've got this lovely plate of chorizo. This is great. This, perhaps unlike the Albarino, is not a wine that you need to be shy when it comes to the pairings, you know, because it's got nice richness and spice. We're up here at, you know, 14% alcohol. It's not a shy wine. So I think we're now definitely moving into the sort of strong cheeses, grilled, barbecued, roasted meats. You know, some cooked chorizo, perhaps even more than just the raw chorizo here would be fantastic. I think given the Syrah element, I always think Syrah works really well with lamb, and so, you know, some nice kind of slow cooked haunch of lamb would be rather good. Plenty of rosemary. I think it would work really nicely. So yeah, some fairly rich grilled red meats, barbecues, strong cheeses, that sort of thing. Okay, I think unless there's any further comments, I'm now looking at the chat, so I'm seeing everything coming in, all sounding very exciting in some cases. I'll move on to the sherry. Now, I brought with me a smaller glass for the sherry. You don't have to, and in fact, in many respects, you shouldn't, but I just have. Now, this is an interesting one because when Charlie and I were chatting earlier today about any sort of joining instructions for this evening, one of the kind of questions was A, when to do the sherry and the tasting, and B, what temperature to serve it at. And I think it's the Oloroso that we have now is definitely should be the final wine in the lineup. But with regards to what temperature you should serve it, I think hopefully you've all got it slightly chilled now. But what will be interesting is to see how it evolves in the glass when it warms up, whether you like it more when it's warmer or whether you prefer it when it's cold. I'm just going to give myself a little glass now. So, sherry. Sherry is always in danger of becoming fashionable. It's a bit like bits of London. I won't say which ones because possibly people live there. Maybe I do for that matter. You know, they're always up and coming, and it's always the next big thing. And it just never quite happens. And for as long as I've been in wine, which is, you know, getting on, well, it's 20 years now. It's terrifying. You know, sherry has always been promising to make the comeback that it deserves. And it's not that it doesn't deserve it. It's just that, I don't know, we haven't embraced sherry in the same way or with the same enthusiasm that we did since the 1580s. I think sherry had its heydays in the UK in 1587 when Drake sacked Cadiz and brought back with him over 2,500 butts of sherry. So butts are very, very large barrels. And I think, you know, we went a bit sherry crazy for a while, and sherry has never quite recovered. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing for the bodegas, for the sherry makers, because their wines are amazing, deserve wider attention, and deserve to be far higher priced, given the love and care that goes into making them and the time it takes to bring them to market. However, it's really good for the consumer, for us, because we get to buy these amazing aged wines for next to nothing by comparison to any other fine wine region in the world. So just to give you a little bit of history on the region itself, because it's one of the oldest wine regions in the world. It's certainly one of the very oldest wine regions in Europe. I'll pull up the map for a starter, because that's always quite fun. Hang on. Right, here we go. No, not you. Hang on. Aha, right. So, sherry country. So we're now moving out of the north altogether. In fact, we're going almost as far south as you can in Spain. And we're right down here by Cadiz, in fact. So I mentioned Francis Drake's famous burning of Cadiz, singeing of the King of Spain's beard. And along with all the gold and the loot, as I said, he came away with, actually, it was 2,800 butts of sherry. So well done, Sir Francis. The region itself is, you know, relatively small. If you look at it, it's all encapsulated between the three towns of Jerez de la Frontera, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and El Puerto de Santa Maria. I hope you like my Spanish accent as well. I've been working on that too. But this was an important coastal area, an important port, of course, given its strategic position here, right on the join of the two oceans, Atlantic and Mediterranean. It was a major port, and it was originally a Phoenician trading port. In fact, the Phoenicians, who were the great merchant traders, travelers of the ancient world. And then after that, their offshoots, the Carthaginians, in fact, had a base here. And in fact, even in 200 BC, we had the Romans referring to the wines of Seretanum, so a wine from Seret, in fact, and were referenced by the poet Martial. So that was, you know, even as early as 200 BC, we had a pretty, a pretty evolved wine culture for the region. Then, of course, there was that period with the invasion of the Moors, where, you know, all of a sudden under Islamic rule, you would imagine that the wine production would stop altogether, and it largely did in some respects. At the same time, it was actually under the Moorish occupation that they started distilling. It was actually the Moors who came up with the whole process and concept of alembic distillation, and this happened in Jerez. So whilst, you know, not meant to be drinking, a lot of distillation going on, the kind of Spanish brandy, which has given so many of us so many appalling hangovers in hopefully previous existences. The next important bit for Jerez was obviously the Reconquista in the 1200s, and after this period, you had the great wave of New World exploration. Thank you, Sneh. Great wave of New World exploration. Of course, you know, Ferdinand Magellan, Christopher Columbus setting off from Cadiz, other explorers setting off from Sanlúcar de Barrameda here on the coast. they were all heading off to discover the new world, and they were laden with the wines of Sherish. Sherish was the name that had been given to the region by the Moors. So we'd gone from Seret to Sherish. And they were heading off merrily to discover America with holds laden with the wines of sherry. In fact, I managed to find a great stat earlier I really like, that Magellan, when he began his famous circumnavigation of the globe, he spent 560,000 maravedis on armaments and weapons and equipment for his ships, and 590,000 maravedis on wine. So, I mean, that's the right kind of preparation for a global journey, I think. I'm very impressed by that. So after this, so in fact, there's a very strong, it's almost certain that sherry was the first wine to find itself in the New World, in fact. And then the next important thing is that the English, the Brits, got involved. And again, I mentioned Francis Drake. There's the famous reference in Shakespeare in Henry IV, Part 2, where in fact Falstaff says, "If I had 1,000 sons, the first humane principle I would teach them should be to forswear thin potations and addict themselves to sack." Now, before any of you get any ideas, sack was the English name for sherry. It was Sherris sack, it was known as, in fact. And sherry became really big in the UK in this period, in fact. And I suppose it never really recovered after the 1500s, not least because, you know, our issues with Spain, the wars, for example, meant that other regions, Portugal in particular, really began to dominate in popularity. By the way, none of you are drinking. Just because I'm yabbering away doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy the sherry. Yeah. Oh, that is good. So the key thing is to the styles of sherry and the method of production is that the fortification, which makes sherry as we know it today, came a little bit later on, in fact. And the two key elements with sherry are really the Solera system, so the constant topping up from a series of barrels, rather than making a specific single vintage. You do see on occasion, but that's rare. And then this fortification of the wine so that it's more alcoholic, basically. The way that sherry is made is it's made like a normal wine to begin with. The grapes all come from the three different communes that I mentioned earlier, which is Jerez de la Frontera, Puerto de Santa Maria, and Sanlúcar de Barrameda. And these regions all have soils which are dominated by this albariza soil. So it's this very chalk-rich soil. In fact, the picture behind me, if I get out of the way, these are the vineyards of Jerez, and you can just about see the very chalky soil underneath. If you fly over the region, it looks like you're going over a Christmas cake. It really does. It's this white blanket of soil on top. And the key thing about the soil, this very chalk-rich soil, is that it traps the water, which is so important, because here, as you can imagine, we're right on the join of the Mediterranean. It is insanely hot. It's frankly far too hot to be drinking 18% alcohol, but there we go. But at least the chalk keeps the water in the soil from the winter rains, and it means in the very hot summer months, there's enough water reserves to stop the wine from, stop the grapes from dehydrating. So once we've got our wine, once we've got our grapes rather, and the grapes in the vast majority of sherry are the Palomino grape, all 100% Palomino, this Oloroso. The next thing is, once it's been fermented, it then gets we then add reconstituted grape must. It used to be brandy, and it's so I'm just seeing some of the comments here. It's very, very good. Excellent. Someone's definitely been on not just this sherry, but the cooking sherry earlier too. Once we've got our wine, it's fortified, which obviously gives it the greater degree of alcohol, and also changes the character of the wine itself. So we start in sherry with the fino style. Fino basically meaning fine, and this would be the young wine, which has been fortified. And then what happens in these large barrels of traditionally American oak is you get a layer of what is called flor forms. And flor is a naturally forming yeast, which forms like a big thick white layer on top of the wine, and it stops any oxygen coming into the wine, which is, but you do get, by way of return, this very kind of yeasty autolytic character in fino. Particularly you find if you go down to San Luca de Barrameda, which I always think of as being like the Brighton of sherry. It's just kind of cool and chilled out and fun and by the coast and nice tapas. It's a little bit cooler there. The flor yeast is a lot thicker. And what you find is that the wines are very, very fresh, very, very elegant and light. And here they are known as manzanilla, which means little apples. And that's because of the freshness there. We could have tried today a Amontillado, which is sort of an aged fino, where the flor yeast has begun to die back a bit, and you start to get this more a browner, tawnier character, more oxidative character. Or, however, in the case of the Oloroso, Oloroso means pungent. And what we've got here is a sherry which is developed almost entirely without the presence of flor yeast. So here we've got really very, very oxidative character. Lots and lots of nuts and tobacco and caramel. Really very rich, very, very, well, pungent, as the name suggests. And this particular bodega, Maestro Sierra, is named after a cooper, a barrel maker, Jose Antonio Sierra, who made barrels for the sort of aristocratic Jerez producers in the 1900s, and then began his own production on what was then the sort of outskirts of Jerez in La Merced. And if everyone holds up the bottle, have a look at the label. What do you see on the label? Tell me what you see. What is it? I'm looking for either a direct comments or
bit of hunting. Bit of hunting.
Bit of hunting. Yes, fox hunt. Yes, fox hunt. Exactly. So the story here is that virtually all of the old bodegas, so the old wineries, have all been bought and taken over by the big multinationals, Allied Domecq, being key amongst them, in fact. But actually, Maestro Sierra remains a small, still family-run, independent bodega. And the whole notion behind the label is that they are the fox out in front, and the big multinationals are the hounds who are chasing them, trying to capture them in order to kind of take away their independence or kill them, basically. So yeah, so far they remain independent, and long may they do so. They're very interesting for a number of reasons. Obviously, the quality is truly profound, but they use these large 500-liter American oak butts to age the wine in. So this is almost twice the size of the normal barrels that are used. Some of these barrels are over 200 years old, in fact. So the Solera system that I mentioned very briefly earlier, I'll unpack a bit now. Now we're talking about the barrels. This is effectively a topping up system, where it originally started because when sales of sherry began to slacken off after the 1500s, what producers would do is they would take some out of a barrel to sell, and then they would top it up with the new, fresher, younger vintage in order to, you know, keep the barrel fresh and to give it a bit more life and energy. And then what became an occasional practice then became very standardized, and now that's how you make sherry. Is you have a whole row of barrels on top of each other, you know, 5 or 6 barrels deep, and whatever you take out of the oldest barrel on the bottom, you replace with the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, the next one. And then the barrels at the very top, you top up with the new made wine. So what this means is that you are continually topping up the wine, but also you're ensuring that it is always a blend, and there should always be a sense of regularity in the style. Dom, I thought you were about to take a sip out of the bottle there, and that would have been quite impressive. But yeah, so now I'm just going back quickly to some of the questions here. Let's have a little look. I'm trying to cut through some of the hot tub stuff here, but I think there were 1 or 2 serious points. Oh, William, how does the style compare to port? So that's an interesting one. So the fundamental difference between port and sherry is that with port, you actually stop the fermentation process through the addition of reconstituted grape must or alcohol of some description, thus trapping some of the unresolved, unfermented sugars in the liquid. Whereas with sherry, you actually ferment them all out. You start with a dry product, and then you add the alcohol. And the addition of the alcohol in the case of Jerez determines whether or not the floor yeast will develop or not. Because if you add more than, if you top up the alcohol to more than 15.5, 16%, the floor yeast cannot survive, and thus the wine will develop like this as an oloroso. So very oxidized, oxidative, nutty, rich brown. If you keep the alcohol below 16, you get the floor yeast and you end up with a fino or manzanilla style. It looks, so Dom saying it smells like port, looks like port, but doesn't taste like port. Why does it smell like port but not so? I think I've kind of partially answered that question. The very key answer though is the question of sweetness. So this is a dry oloroso. This is a dry oloroso, whereas what I imagine you're smelling when you smell this is like a tawny port style, which it can be confused for on the nose. It can be confused for on the nose, but so if you've got a similar nose between tawny port and dry oloroso on the palate, because as I said, we've fermented all of the sugar out in the sherry, whereas we wouldn't have done in the port. That's why you get a much drier, nuttier character than you would find in the port. We're actually, I must admit that the hour has sort of shot past, so we're running a little bit late, so apologies. If anyone needs to disappear off, then please don't let me keep you. If you're happy to stay on for ever so slightly longer, then I'll just make a few comments in conclusion, but also I love talking about food pairing with sherry. You know, this for me is a very gastronomic wine. I'm drinking it with my chorizo here, but I remember my old sherry at the WSET actually said that for him, his favorite pairing with oloroso was with his roast sirloin or roast rib of beef on a Sunday. In fact, he would have it instead of claret. Instead of Bordeaux, he'd have a nice bottle of oloroso with his roast beef. And I mean, you know, if you like 19% wines at your table, then I think absolutely don't be shy, go for it. And I have tried it, it does work very well. It is fantastic with cheeses as well. You know, Nathan's mentioned that, you know, so a really good manchego would be brilliant with a little bit of membrillo, you know, that lovely quince paste is a classic combo. To Roger's point, just more generally about sherry pairing, I think that I think you can afford to be a little bit experimental, frankly. You know, sherry is surprisingly versatile. One of the, I think, fascinating things about sherry is it has an incredibly high umami content, in fact. So I remember years ago doing this quite fun project with Heston Blumenthal, where he deconstructed various dishes and then remade them using sherry as an ingredient. And in fact, even at the Hind's Head in Bray, he does this this kind of mince pie, mince tart rather, with blue cheese, cabrales. So it's a mince pie with cabrales on top, and he serves that with a sherry. And that was something which we experimented with together, because sherry is so umami rich. You can pair it up with crazy things. A great one, seasonally opportune now, or just artichokes. Artichokes are an acknowledged bastard to pair anything with, because I think it's called cyanin is the chemical, which just makes all wines taste really metallic. So if you want to try Jerusalem or normal Dom, normal artichokes. Jerusalem, I mean, Jerusalem, it's not really the wine pairing you need to worry about. It's more the results on your gastric system. In fact, they're not known as fartichokes for nothing. But with normal artichokes, and a Amontillado sherry is tremendous, in fact, and it works really well. Sneh, are you trying to comment? Please do if you are.
No, just a question of Amontillado. In fact, is Amontillado a sherry, or is it something different?
Yes. So Amontillado is an aged Fino. It's effectively a sherry which has started off life as a Fino, but then for whatever reason, perhaps the temperature or too much extra wine's been added, that layer of floor yeast has started to die off. So what that means is that you start to get this oxidative influence. As the oxygen hits the wine, it actually starts to burnish, to go brown, to taste richer. Teresa's just joined me, actually. I imagine she's in urgent need of glass. So
hello.
Yeah. Where's your glass? Oh, there it is. Good. There you go. Look, I'm just giving Teresa some Albarino. There we are.
Thank you very much.
So the name Amontillado actually is a reference to Montilla Moriles, the region next door to Jerez, because there the wines were made in a slightly richer style to begin with, and it was reminiscent of that style. So it's very much a sherry, and it's right in between the Fino style, which we're probably most familiar with, the Tio Pepes of the world, and the Oloroso, which we're having now. It kind of bisects them right down the middle stylistically. So any more comments or questions, live or on chat? I'm just seeing, is there anything up there? Oh, hang on. Wait a minute. I've got a good one. Yes, something. Dom, we were talking about sherry's not had the attention to the 1580s. Queen Mother and Queen and Grandmother. Yeah. So yes.
How long can we leave it now we've opened the bottle?
So that Oloroso, because it's made in the oxidative style, it's not a Fino, that'll last for weeks. I would say 2 months. 2 months before you'll see any degradation. I mean, I'd be quite impressed if you can make any half bottle last longer than a week, but you know, in terms of its potential, yeah, there's no hurry with that.
We're not big sherry drinkers.
But try this. Do try this with as I said, with your cheese board after dinner. You know, rather than red or sweet. This is lovely, particularly with like harder, stronger cheeses. It's really very, very nice indeed as a little glass. I was going to say, though, that the converse applies. Any of you who have a half-drunk bottle of Tio Pepe knocking around the drinks cabinet that's been there for 6 weeks, please cook with it, you know, or throw it away. Because Fino sherry should only ever be bought in halves, unless you're a raging alcoholic and get through a full bottle in 10 minutes. Because you've got to remember, completely unlike the Oloroso, the Fino has grown up completely without the presence of oxygen. And thus, the moment you pull the cork, crack open the seal, it starts to degrade immediately. And you can notice an appreciable difference even within 20 minutes to half an hour of opening a bottle of Fino. So honestly, if you want to get the best out of the lighter sherries, buy them in halves and drink them within an hour of opening, for sure. So I wanted to go back to Dominic's question or comment about about the Queen Mother and grandmothers. Yes, the image of sherry has traditionally been either hampered by, or at least certainly dominated by, the kind of the really old bottle of cream sherry that was stuck in the grandmother's cabinet and comes out at Christmas. I actually wrote an article for Boysdale magazine on it was, for me, it was the most useful wine guide you'll ever read, because it was the only wines you should never ever drink. And in there, I did actually put cream sherry, the kind of Bristol cream, this sort of thing. And the problem I have with this style, this very rich, very sweet, very sticky style, is that when you consider the love and attention that goes into making sherry, where you've got, in this case, for example, this Oloroso is 15 years old at least. You've got all the different layers of complexity from the Solera system, the nuances, and then all of a sudden you add this very, very sweet Pedro Jimenez, which is like liquidized raisins. And it's the comment I made in the article was it's basically like Rembrandt spending 10 years completing the Night Watch, and then he's finishing stroke with a lob of can of Dulux primer over the top. That's, I'm afraid, my take on the sweet, sticky sherry, which your dear grandmother, I'm sure, loves. So there you go. Apologies for that. Anyway, team, we're now running well over time. My apologies. But oh gosh, there's still messages flying in here. But luckily, it's more about Marcus's dog, so that's good. So once again, thank you so much for joining this evening. I hope you've learned a little bit, drunk a fair bit. Henry, are you waving, or did you want to comment? That's a wave. That's a wave. Okay. Our next session, and I think I'm seeing virtually all of you back for that one, which will be tremendous, is same time next week, where I believe we're doing global Pinot Noirs, which I'm really looking forward to. We have other events in our wine therapy series and sessions, including next week, what promises to be. No, sorry, it's not next week. Well, we've got a wonderful tasting next week for our Premier Crew Club members and guests. You're welcome to join, where we're going to have Jane Eyre live from Burgundy joining us. In fact, Jane is absolutely amazing. She's from Melbourne. She makes incredible wines in Burgundy. It's always fun to have her at our tastings. As she can't join us in person, she's coming live from Burgundy to talk about some pretty exciting things that she's doing both in Australia and in Burgundy. And then the week after that, we have Clemens Busch joining us, in fact. Wonderful, wonderful winemaker from the Moselle. If you think, the wines of Spain, and particularly sherry, are underrated and underpriced, then, you ain't seen nothing yet, because great German Riesling is... I would unmute Nathan, but he won't stop talking if I do. But, great German Riesling is absolutely, it really is the be-all and end-all of underrated fine white wines. So please do check out other events we have coming up. thank you so much for joining. Been a real pleasure. And look forward to seeing you for another wine therapy session very soon. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Tom.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Wonderful, Tom. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.